Our 68 Camaro was very common in the fact that the cowl box area had rusted out on both sides. And this is the steel that's right behind the fender where the rainwater and leaves and debris all collect and rust that panel from the inside out. So we ordered up some new replacement cowl box pieces from Classic Industries, and Nick went ahead and made that repair.
As we were tearing into the cowl boxes of the 68 Camaro, we decided to take the whole passenger side cowl box out because there was so much rot in this area that it'd make more sense to just replace the whole assembly. The driver's side, however, only has a little bit of rot on the bottom of the skin, so we're just replacing that.
The first step in removing the driver's side cowl box outer panel was to drill the spot welds out of the perimeter of the panel. And then Nick broke out our HTP plasma torch and did some broad cuts to remove the outer skin. With the main chunk of the skin out of the way, Nick was able to peel away the remnants piece by piece and either pull them right off the car or use a combination of further drilling and a hammer and a chisel and an air hammer to pry away the remaining parts of skin from the original structure.
The driver's side of the car had a little bit of rot, or had a little bit of like pinholes rough through here because of all the leaves, and then there were some holes right through this part. So I just made this out of a scrap piece of metal to replace it. What are you doing here, Nick? Putting a little weld-through primer on the surface that I'm going to be putting this new piece on so that there's a barrier so it doesn't rust in between there.
Nick used a combination of plug welds around the perimeter of his new patch and then butt welded the leading edge using a series of tack welds, again to keep the panel cool without warping it and causing fitment issues. We think it's important that after you remove that cowl box skin to make sure there's no rust inside that box area. You can media blast it or sand blast it or even use a chemical treatment to remove the rust. And make sure you pick out any of the old seam sealer that was left inside there. And once that area is all cleaned out, we like to reseal it with a high quality 3M seam sealer and then prime and paint the area with a rust fighting enamel, which makes sure that if any water gets back inside there, it'll run out without undoing all the work that you just did. The new outer cowl box skin from Classic Industries is a very, very nice piece. It's very accurate. It looks exactly like the original. Nick used an HTP punch and flange tool so that we could weld this to the original car. After all the holes were punched, Nick protected the panel with some rust-prohibitive black enamel spray paint. Next, it was time to clamp this panel in place, and note the use of all the different kinds of clamps that are used to hold this as securely as possible to the rest of the cowl box. The tighter you can get this, the better the weld process will go, and it will fit just like the original. Nick used our HTP MIG 200 MIG welders to plug weld the whole perimeter and securely fasten this panel to the car. And then Nick used a series of 3M roll-lock discs to finish off those welds. Moving back to the passenger side, the repair is a little more involved because we're replacing the entire cowl box using a brand new assembly from Classic Industries. In this case, we're not installing this piece as it is right out of the box because we will be installing a Vintage Air Gen 4 SureFit AC system into this car, which doesn't require the opening where the original heater fan went. So Nick made a patch to weld this part closed. Again, Nick protected all the mating surfaces with some HTP weld-through primer, and then he used a series of sheet metal screws and clamps to attach the inner cowl box to the body structure and began to plug weld the assembly into place. Once the inner structure was securely welded to the car, Nick test fitted the outer panel to the new inner piece to make sure that it fit properly. It's important to remember that sometimes these panels don't fit the way you want them to right out of the box, and they might require a little hammering and dollying or twisting or bending, or in our case, just a little bit of trimming to make them fit the way you want. Next, Nick cleaned the whole inner structure using some Scotch-Brite pads to scuff that E-coat that came on the Classic Industries panel. And this was done to prepare for the next step, which was going to be some seam sealer and then primer. You want to make sure that you have proper adhesion of all the chemicals, and that's why he scuffed all that inner area and then wiped it down with wax and grease remover. Wherever there was welding done or where two panels came together, Nick masked those areas off using some 3M masking tape and then applied some seam sealer in there to make sure that moisture didn't work its way into or out of this area. The 3M seam sealer was brushed smooth, and then the tape is removed, leaving a very clean line. And although this is inside an area that's going to be welded shut, we like to make sure that all of these details are addressed so that you know this car was built properly from the inside out. After the seam sealer is dried, a layer of primer and then epoxy paint is applied to keep things from rusting. Nick used as many clamps as he possibly could to hold the new skin in place, making sure that this thing fit as tight as possible for a completely original fit and a nice, strong structure. The only challenge here was fitting the welder between the clamps to plug weld the whole thing solid. After the weld operation is complete, Nick went back and cleaned up those welds using a variety of different grinders, and in this case, a cutoff wheel to get into those tight areas and grind those welds clean. So once again, this Classic Industries panel has been installed in a manner that is basically undetectable. It looks like we were never there, and that cowl box is now nice and rigid again, and if this car ever came apart, you'd never be able to tell that this repair was made.